So you're at Opera Carolina now, and you're getting ready to do your first new opera.
Well, we did, I called Robert Ward, whom I sort of knew, who was then in North Carolina. And he said, I have just the opera for you. It was going to be on television, but it turned out to be too long, and it was never finished. And it was about Abelard and Eloise, which had marvelous conflicts of interest. St. Bernard believed in, believes, and Abelard who believed in reason, so they were clashing, kind of thing. And then there was Abelard and Eloise. She was to become a pupil of Abelard. He could see her anytime, 24 hours a day. She was very, very bright, and of course he was too. He was not someone that did masses. He was more of a teacher. And it was a big cast. One of the leads came from Hamburg, was American. And I can't say it was a perfect production. We had a stage director I brought down from New York who understood television, because this was being televised for the record, maybe make a recording later or whatever. And everything worked out, except these TV people said the orchestra's too loud. Now that would be a result of the hall, I guess, a seat of 2,000. And I said, well, you've got to play softer. Concertmaster says, why don't you just let's go home, you won't let us play. I would never do that again. I would say, you fix it, I'm not fixing it, this is the way it is. But anyway, it got wonderful reviews. We brought in people from all over the country, including Beverly Sills and others. And it didn't lose a penny. And it was a wonderful success. And they never did a new opera again. I can't explain that state of mind, because I think they do now.
Sure,
finally.
they do.
But I wanted to do new operas, so I got Bob Ward together, and kind of quite well known.
So we're back with Dr. Richard Marshall. So your time at Opera Carolina was over, and
Yes, it
then
was.
you went to New York.
I put everything into a U-Haul that I could pull to. Well, first we had to decide where it was going to happen. I went to Washington, where there was somebody involved in the arts. And I said, where can this work? New operas. I think it needs either a very special place or it needs to be a large city. So there's enough people to come,
Right.
kind of thing. Well, it ended up being New York City, which I had been in, but I didn't know New York at all, even though I didn't live so far away from it. And I had rented an apartment, 4th floor in Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn. That meant my piano, which I was bringing with me, had to go up 4 floors manually. And I didn't know how to do it, so I hired a company that said, this is when I'll be there. You come with your equipment and we'll take it up to the 4th floor window. And I got there, there's nobody there. I called the company, we don't know anything about this. Oh! That must have been Joe, he's on vacation. And we can't do it right now, but we can take the piano and put it in storage until we can do it. So that was there. That was a very small apartment, but I loved it. It was an Italian working class place that
So tell us about how the Center for Contemporary Opera got started.
Well, when I got to my Brooklyn apartment, that really was the beginning of my life. What I really wanted to do. But how do you do it?
Right.
I had learned about running a company with a board, a large board. But, well, there I was collecting unemployment insurance and looking for some kind of work. And a church on Central Park West was looking for a music director. This was the Fourth Universalist Society of New York.
Sure, know exactly where
It
it
was
is.
a large sort of
Right.
English
Right.
kind of church with all kinds of problems that, as far as I know, never got resolved. But they hired me to do the music, and they had a tower, stone tower, and you go up a winding stairs to a room up there, and that would be the music room. And they gave me permission that could be the office for the Center for Contemporary Opera. So that was all very nice.
How'd you come up with the name?
It wasn't heated or anything. That was for future, I guess. And the church had a business manager who really was a painter, who was very supportive of what I was trying to do. So he made the church available to me whenever it wasn't being rented or having a service. And the realtor that had showed me my Brooklyn apartment became a volunteer. And almost more than a volunteer. I had asked her to marry me later, but it wouldn't work because her parents were Orthodox Jews, and I'm not Jewish and so on. Anyway, there we were, and the city of New York sent me a man who was unemployed. It was part of their program for unemployed. He actually came from Russia, and he was an artist himself, and he loved to do calligraphy. So he began compiling names and addresses, but he may take 5 minutes to do one. We didn't have a computer or anything at all when we first started out. So we had to figure out what to do. And we put on some productions. We did a Kurt Weill piece, which is not New American, and some things like that. But I'm trying to remember everything we did in those early years.
Didn't you do a production at the Henry Street Settlement?
Pardon?
Didn't you do an early production at the Henry Street Settlement?
Yes, that was the first theater. Henry Street Settlement was in the Lower East Side. It was 5 blocks from a subway. It was from a place none of my audiences knew at all. And so that was sort of a problem. It was a nice little theater which needed a lot of work in it. And we performed there. And the fellow that worked there became the production person for when we did shows there. And our first show was by a Canadian composer. And we gave the first premiere of a Canadian opera ever done in New York City. And the chief music critic of the New York Times came down, which was wonderful. And he said, "This is like early opera." There was only one singer. And he said, "You need to go down and see it." I thought that was a wonderful treat.
Sure.
That's our review down there. But that place became a problem. The lady that ran it had a boyfriend who was doing things with cameras. And we had paid for rehearsing the next opera. He had all his equipment in the pit. And I said, look, we paid for this, I want to use it. She wouldn't budge. And that was the end of using that theater. Then we did things in the Lutheran church in City Corps.
The new one or the old one?
Pardon?
The new one or the old Lutheran church?
The City Corps church was very modern.
Yes, so the new one, right, okay.
Yeah, yes, the new one. And I had done Curl River at the Arlington Street Church in Boston when I was in Boston. And frankly, that's one of the best things they've ever done. It was just wonderful. But the fellow from the theater down below was supposed to do things, you know, the floor costumes and so on. He never did them.
Mm.
And the New York Times said, why is his name in the program?
Yeah.
But we did that show there. And we kept going. I believed that we needed to be a union company if we were to get good players. So we joined the union. Whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, it certainly determined a lot of things you did, because you had to negotiate all the salaries through the union. Now, they helped us out to a certain extent at the beginning, which was nice of them. And we also found a place way over on the west side of Manhattan where you could rent instruments, where you could rehearse if you wished to, and they would set everything up.
Right.
Yeah, and that was very useful. And they would set things up in the pit, wherever we went. Well, we came to use several different places, but the one we used the most was at Hunter College. The Danny Kaye Playhouse. Danny Kaye's wife had gone to Hunter. But the theater had a dome, which, to say the least, is not conducive to good acoustics.
Right.
You could hear, if you were out in the audience, you could hear somebody on the stage, right? Well, and it would go across and you'd hear it perfectly. But if they moved to different parts of the stage, it was hard to hear them.
Right.
That was a problem. But they got some money and they did everything they could, but she loved the dome, so you couldn't get rid of that. And we did many shows there quite successfully. We had one that was a tragedy, that was Markheim by Carlisle Floyd, where in the middle of the program, I heard bells, but there were no bells in the score. What's going on? They passed me a note while I was conducting. Don't worry, they have a lot of false alarms here. Then the theater manager walked down the aisle. Everybody has to leave by order of the fire department. And somebody in the 9th floor, some student, had put his lunch in an oven in plastic, and noxious fumes were coming down. And we went to another building and hoped we'd get back, which we didn't. And somebody else, don't ask for your money back, kind of thing. Well, not only were we doing shows, I thought we should do something more for singers. So I started the International Opera Singers. And that drew singers from every part of the world. I was surprised. And they would come, and if they won, they would get $5,000 and a program in one of the theaters at Carnegie Hall. Well, that worked pretty well, except financially. After a while, we had to stop it because we weren't making money.
Right.
But the judges for that were often opera singers from the Met, older singers, And they only wanted to hear standard repertory.
Right.
And of course, my interest was elsewhere. So I put in the stipulation the singers had to do part of the program as new pieces, and the audience, the judges, had to listen to a new piece. They couldn't just not do it. And that worked all right, but then since we couldn't continue it for money reasons, so we kept performing in various places. The Symphony Space on 95th and Broadway, which originally had been a skating rink, had been turned into a theater, and I got to know a fellow that was instrumental there, and we did some operas there. It seated about 750 people, and that worked out fairly well. I took the director of that place to lunch one day, and I said, why don't you let us be part of your organization, you know, doing operas? But they weren't interested in that. And we had one opera where they came to me. A lady who was a dancer. She'd written a story that uses dancers, obviously, and asked this fellow to write the libretto, which he did. And we had a fellow who was Polish, who was a stage director, and we had this woman. They were fighting all the time. They just couldn't exist together. We had to fire the stage director because it was her opera. You know, she started it. You had no choice there, which was too bad. But we did it. It wasn't one of our best pieces.
What was the name of it?
You know, I can't remember right now, but it was a lot of American history kind of thing. And we got a group in New York that had a small vocal ensemble, became the actors in this. And the fellow told me later he learned more about American history doing that opera than he ever knew before.
Nice.
So that kind of thing came along. Well, we also did workshops.
Right.
Of various pieces. And I believe if you totaled them all off, we must have done at least 50 different people, 50 different pieces, workshops, full productions, and we were becoming known, and we had pretty good audiences all the way. The Cape House held 450 seats in it, and they handled the tickets, and that worked out. Now, at the beginning, I was the conductor of everything, which only made sense at that time. And, well, I was conductor, producer, and all the rest. But after a while, some of the shows would hire other people to conduct also, which I think probably was a good idea, kind of thing. And finally, I had been there 25 years, doing operas every year. I'd gotten some wonderful reviews.
Right.
And I started to lose some of my hearing, and I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I was 79 years old. I started when I was 55. But we were a very well-known company, and I've heard it said that this was really the second company in the city because City Operettes ceased basically existing. I don't know whether that's true or not. I really don't care. But they threw a big party for me, and that was very nice. And then they had to find a new director, and it turned out to be Jim Schaeffer from North Carolina. Now, the last piece we did was Alice in Wonderland by Peter Westergaard. Peter had written some big operas and using lots of resources, but he'd always wanted to do the story of Alice in Wonderland. And he said, would they like to do it together? And we could perform it in Princeton as well as in New York, which we agreed to do. he had to decide what kind of orchestra. Now, this is rather unusual. And he ended up saying, why do we need an orchestra at all? There were some musical instruments and, you know, when the cast was off stage, they would be playing these instruments, and we had used handbells, old English handbells, which Peter had, whenever necessary, just to keep everything on pitch as part of the show,
Sure,
not as
sure.
something extra kind of thing. And I wanted to conduct, that was going to be my last opera. But he insisted all his operas had been done by the conductor at Princeton, and finally I agreed. We had wonderful costumes for that. And
They were, yes.
yeah, so I'd have to read off all the things that we've done, but it was a lot. And I was very proud of the company, and that was it.
And that was it, and that brings us now to Marshall Opera, our new endeavor. And what are your goals and
Some guy
objectives?
called me on the phone and said, let's start an opera company. Now, I was now in Vermont, and my wife had died, and I was getting older. But it sounded like maybe it was something worth considering, and I said, well, what would you call it? We thought of, you know, Manhattan, this, that. He said, most of those names have been used. You need something different. Let's call it Marshall Opera. No, I didn't know whether I liked that name or not. I didn't particularly object. I knew basically I wasn't going to be able to physically do anything, pay for a lot of things that happen. And now we're up here talking about it and seeing
Absolutely.
where it goes from here.
Absolutely right. So March 25th, we'll announce this to the public and look forward to you making another trip to New York to be our guest of honor.
I was told there were at least 40 different opera companies in New York City.
There are 40 different opera companies, correct?
I remember one was doing all the big operas. They lasted about a year and they were gone, come and go kind of thing. There was another company that had some money, but they misappropriated their funds and that was out of business. And I acted cooperatively in New York with American Opera Projects and another group that actually I never saw perform. I know the head of it had been on the board of Opera America. And when possible, we tried to help each other out.
Right.
I mean, I always wanted to be cooperative, not fight other groups. And, well, that was the one thing I've done in my life that I'm very proud of.
As you should be. As you
But
know,
it's all in the past now. I imagine it takes a few years, everybody will forget about all these things as they move on to other things. But I'm hoping with the new opera company that we're not stuck doing the same old things that we did, that we were able to use maybe electronic instruments or whatever to take advantage of what's happening in the world right now.
Mhm.
And I wait to see what happens.
Well, as you know, Mark Shapiro, who has worked with you in the past, will be the chief conductor of the new company.
Yeah. I realized I was not a great conductor, but I was okay. I played for all the rehearsals, I coached all the singers, I could do all of that, and I conducted most of the operas. I'm not of the caliber of the people that are conducting at the Met, but I was pretty good.
You were.
And I basically got lots and lots of good reviews, and I think we did a good job.
Well, I was very proud to take over the Center for Contemporary Opera, and you certainly left me with a wonderful organization
Yeah.
to direct. And
Well, I
always
was
appreciative of
pleased
that.
because after I left, the opera company still flourished, maybe not financially, but in what they did. And they took the operas to Szeged and then to Avignon. And I was very proud of that. And they were in an opera festival with 5 companies. And it was always the audience's favorites,
Right.
what we did. And that's why we got invited to Avignon. And I didn't see 1 year. You were there for 2 years. I only saw The Secret Agent of Michael Delara, which I thought was a good piece. And then it changed because the director then decided he didn't want to do it anymore. And then he got the opera bug again, and we'll see what happens.
Well, we'll see what happens, but we will hopefully be around many, many years to carry on your name and legacy and all the good works that you've
Well,
done.
that's what I hope happens, but who knows?
I'm
I can't.
very confident.
I can't predict the future.
No one can, but we'll do our best. We'll do our best. And
But
so-
I see no reason, if fundraising is successful, that it can't do a great job. But fundraising is, to me, is the clue.
It's the hardest part. I was just
You
telling
have the money.
Eddie
you
Rose
don't.
this morning, it's the hardest part of running an opera.
I know that. I was not a fundraiser, but I could write proposals, I could go see people, and I could try to get money. We never got big grants. $5,000 seemed to be a big grant one time.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been
Well, thank
It's a
you.
remarkable life you've had.
I'd like to know what this thing is that you're doing over there.
you'll see it soon enough. You'll be famous on YouTube, I'm quite sure. So thanks again, Richard, and it's been a real pleasure being here with you.